Okay, a very good morning to everyone with us online. Okay, my name is Mohammed and it is my pleasure to welcome you to CommaCon 2021 Modern Voyeurism. I will be your MC for today. Today's session focuses on modern voyeurism, online crimes, sexual offenders, and more. Now, before we begin, allow me to share a little bit about CommaCon. CommaCon started in 2016 as a convention, spinning off into smaller pilots over the years, such as today's session. CommaCon is a creative and dynamic space for youth to explore and discuss various issues pertinent to Singapore, authentically and unapologetically. This CommaCon, we intend to understand modern voyeurism through a number of case studies which occurred recently. Voyeurism has been recognized as an increasing crime trend as indicated by the passing of the Criminal Law Reform Bill in May 2019. CommaCon is led by Young EMP, the youth wing of EMP Singapore. Youth EMP's mission is to cultivate the spirit of citizenry in young professionals. This specific CommaCon is led by both Young EMP and our partner Improv SG. Improv SG is a group of like-minded young Indian Muslims who wish to actively participate in discussions pertaining to our community. Improv aspires to connect professionals within our community to come together beyond their respective fields and undertake projects that will benefit one and all. We hope today's session, helmed by our esteemed panelists, will allow you to understand the topic better. Please note that the questions will only be taken during the panel discussion at the end of the speaker's presentations. You may drop your question in the comment section below or via our Pigeonhole platform, which you can see on our background. Before we begin, let me invite Ms. Amira to take a group photo of everyone. So I invite everyone to please turn on your camera so that we can see who's attending the convention right now. Are we taking a group photo? Okay.
Okay, can we get everyone to switch on your cameras, please? Alia, Huda, Amri, Shamim, Aisha, Anik, Nurfika, Nurli, can you switch on your cameras? If you are camera shy, maybe you can give me a reaction, okay? Just click on the reaction button and then we'll be able to. Yeah, hi Amri, thank you for switching it on. Okay, everybody ready? One. Yep, mine's gallery. Ready? 1, 2, 3, smile. Again, 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, great.
All right. Thank you, Amira. Without further ado, let's jump right into the presentation segment. Our first speaker is Ms. Kelly Liu. Kelly is the Communications Manager at Aware, Singapore's leading gender equality organization. Since 1985, Aware has worked to identify and eliminate gender-based barriers through the research, advocacy, education, training, and support services, including a long-running women's helpline and Singapore's only dedicated sexual assault care center. Aware has for years analyzed and published data on the technology-facilitated sexual violence cases seen by SACC. Kelly will be sharing about this data and the different ways that Aware helps victims of such crimes. Kelly, please.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Okay, I hope that everyone can see. And let me just apologize because I'm going to try to go quite fast because I have quite a lot to cover this morning. So yeah, apologize in advance for that. Okay, so as the introduction said, I am Kelly. I'm the Communications Manager for Aware. We do run a sexual assault care center, which is the more pertinent branch of Aware for this topic especially. And I will be kind of touching on some of their cases that they see and, the trends that we observe through that center. Oh, sorry, there's a bit of noise. Okay. Okay, so what is sexual violence, right? First of all, I think it's good to kind of just cover this before I get any further. So sexual violence is any sexual act, physical or non-physical, that is non-consensual. So I think it's important to note that there are kind of different definitions, different types of perspectives on sexual violence, and like some of them, not all of them overlap. So like the legal definition of sexual violence is not always the same as like the feminist definition of sexual violence that Aware uses. But yeah, so that's important to note. Obviously, I'm going to be using the feminist definition of sexual violence, and that kind of is very much centered on the idea of consent, right? So consent, whether there is consent or whether there isn't consent, that's kind of the key thing to know in determining whether an action is considered violence or not. So what is consent? I think it's also important to just kind of give a quick overview of this before we talk any further, right? So this is a little kind of acronym that the American organization Planned Parenthood came up with. And it's very easy to remember because fries, my favorite food. And so just to quickly go through these different things, F stands for freely given. So, your consent is not being given under duress. You're not being forced to give consent. Reversible, which means that you can take it back. You can, halfway through, if you change your mind, that's fine. You can withdraw your consent at that point. Informed, which means that you know what you're consenting to. You can't consent to something that you don't understand. Enthusiastic, again, you have to want what you're consenting to. And specific, which is about different types of acts, right? So especially if we think about sexual activity, you can consent to kissing, but that doesn't mean that just because I consent to kissing means I consent to other forms of sexual activity, right? So this is just a very kind of comprehensive and easy to remember definition of consent. And I think what you'll find is that it can actually apply to a lot of other scenarios beyond sexual scenarios. So, we use consent all the time in life, right? So like if I want to go over to my friend's house, I have to ask first, right? And I'm not going to go over and then stay the night without asking, right? So like there are all these different things where you can actually apply a lot of these principles. Sorry. Okay. So specifically within the sexual context though, so these are some examples where there is no consent based on, what I previously defined as consent. So if someone is intoxicated, and they can't understand what's happening, that's no consent. If they are agreeing to have sex under fear of harm, that's not consent. If they agree to one thing, I already said this, and not something else, that's not consent. If they decide to withdraw their consent midway, that's not consent. And and this is legal, right? So if one of the parties is below 16, a minor cannot legally give consent to sexual activity. Okay, so very quickly moving on to technology-facilitated sexual violence, which is a term that we use to describe quite a broad range of different types of sexual violence that is facilitated, obviously, by technology, by digital communications technology. So some of those examples of technology are social media, messaging platforms, like WhatsApp, Telegram, digital cameras on your phones, and we even count like dating apps and ride-hailing apps as part of the technology that can facilitate sexual violence. So specifically for this session, I want to focus on image-based sexual abuse, which again, a lot of acronyms, I'm sorry, but specifically this is about, sexual violence that revolves around images, right? So usually it's the non-consensual creation, obtainment, or distribution of these sexual intimate images, which, is also known as voyeurism in some forms. So yeah, we're gonna touch on these mostly. Okay, so here's just a collage that I made. And I made this in 2019, but I think, we have all become very familiar at this point with headlines like this. We see these like every week, literally every week. Just looking at these headlines right now, I think I probably collected them in 2019 over the course of like, I don't know, 2 months. But now I'm looking at this, I'm like, this could be like 2 weeks worth of headlines in Singapore, honestly. I think what we have all kind of sensed is that there is this kind of unprecedented explosion in behaviors like this, right? And I think we're kind of seeing it as technology advances and becomes very accessible. So, the more access everybody has to things like smartphones and social media and the internet, right, the more they have the means to commit these different types of violent acts. And I think that what we're kind of noticing is our laws, our education system, our language, even our societal practices are not really kind of keeping up with this explosion in technology and the means to commit violence. So just to talk about these different case studies, right, that were really big in the news for the past couple of years. So one of them is obviously SG Nasi Lemak, infamous Telegram group, and also the kind of associated groups that popped up around SG Nasi Lemak, right? So many of these groups had like thousands and thousands of members who were sharing photos of women and girls, most of which were obtained non-consensually or distributed non-consensually, even if they were obtained with consent. And sometimes, identifying information was shared alongside these images, such as people's social media handles, which then enables other people to then go and further harass them by contacting them on their different social media accounts. Some of the images and videos circulated were of minors, so they were literally, child pornography. And some of them involved the monetary exchange. So from what I know, some of the members in these groups actually package together some of the images into folders and then are selling them. So they're actually trying to profit off this sexual violence. It's very disturbing, obviously. And then another one that was big in the news this year was the MeWe poll, right, about the Asatisa. So it was basically inviting members of the public to imagine raping various women, which is obviously extremely distressing and a form of sexual harassment, right? It also included photographs and I think perhaps other identifying information without these women's consent. So I just wanted to note over here that for me, this is less, falls into the category less of voyeurism and more of like harassment and objectification. Because remember, voyeurism is about the kind of obtaining and sharing of intimate images, which isn't really the case, but that's not to say that this is not also extremely distressing and, sexual harassment, basically. So moving on to technology-facilitated sexual violence cases seen by Aware. So as mentioned, we have a sexual assault care center, the only one in the country that's dedicated to helping survivors of sexual assault. And so the light blue bars are the numbers, the total numbers of cases seen at SACC, and the dark blue bars at the bottom are the ones that are that have an element of technology involved. So as you can see, the numbers of those cases, the numbers of all cases are going up every year. But the number of technology-facilitated sexual violence cases are also going up. And what's more, they're also, for most of these years, they are increasing in percentage and proportion to the total cases. And so actually the jump from 2019 to 2020 was a 36% increase from 140 to 191. So we can expect that this year, I don't have the numbers yet for 2021, but we can expect that this year it'll also be going up. And just to drill down on the different types of cases that we are seeing, right, that we fold into this overall umbrella. So non-consensual distribution of sexual images, as already discussed. And I just wanted to note that sometimes the images are digitally altered, or what we might know as deep fakes. And also, may be accompanied by personal details, right? Sexual voyeurism, which is similar or, related, where people are, going around filming their own videos. Sextortion, which is, I guess, a form of extortion, where somebody says, for example, I have your intimate photos, and if you don't continue to have sex with me, I will be sharing this publicly. And then another type of case that we see, kind of cyber harassment, unwanted messages and calls. Some of them also involve images. So like if you send a dick pic without the person's consent, that is considered a form of sexual harassment. And then, so just looking at the numbers from 2020, I just wanted to kind of give more of an overview. So these are the ages of the survivors where known. I think the key thing to note is that, the 18 to 24 year category is by far the biggest. And it that one is the category that actually increased the most, again, if you look at previous years. So this year, or last year, it was 43%. And I think all the years before that, it was never more than 30%. So that's quite a jump for this age group. And then to touch on also the relationship to the perpetrators, right? So I should note that, globally, there's not just at SCCC, but around the world, right? Many organizations and research groups have observed that 8 in 10 perpetrators are known to the survivors. So sometimes we have this idea that like strangers are the ones who are, kind of gonna pop out of an alleyway and assault you, right? Or and strangers are the ones that commit sexual violence, but that's really not the case. So really 80% of sexual violence cases are committed by people who are known. And so of those 80%, here's a breakdown of the different relationships that they might have. And again, you can see that the most biggest group, the most common one is intimate partner or ex-intimate partner. And then followed by acquaintance. But, I also have to note that for us, we kind of lumped a lot of different relationships into acquaintance that didn't fit into the other groups. So, from 2020, the examples included pastor, neighbor, classmate, doctor, coach, landlord, right? So it's kind of a big mix of people that didn't fit into, family member, colleague, and these other categories. And then just to quickly give another overview of the platforms that where some of the sexual violence is being carried out from our experience at SCCC. Telegram is the most common. Telegram, WhatsApp, and Instagram were the most common, I think, last year. But different porn sites, so where people upload videos, Facebook, Tumblr, and the dating apps, right? And really, there's a whole broad other range, so it's not just limited to these. Okay, so what is the effect? What is the harm, right, of technology-facilitated sexual violence? And I listed out quite a lot of different harms, but I want to focus on the ones that most directly impact the survivor. So the 4 on top that I've bolded. So on the left, we have psychological harm. I think that's quite obvious. Depression, anxiety, guilt, anger, sometimes even suicidal thoughts. And then below that, I think something to remember, especially when it comes to Tfsv, is that the trauma can be repeated, right? Because it is very, very difficult to make sure that the materials are fully taken down from the internet. That's just the nature of the internet, And so every time someone uploads it and you get a new notification or you stumble upon it again, right, that's going to be another wave of trauma that you experience. So it's actually, I think sometimes people think that these non-physical forms of violence are less serious, but in many ways it can even be more serious, right, because it happens over and over again. And then on the right-hand side, the reputational damage, that if other people find these videos of you can affect your education situation, your employment situation, even your future relationships. And then lastly, I think something that's overlooked is the financial impact. So for example, if you want to access the services of these companies or organizations that can help to take down these materials for you, it actually costs money. So you might find yourself paying quite a lot of money to use these services to try to take down some of these materials. Okay, and I just wanted to mention over here rape myths, right? So rape myths, I think, are a large part of why the trauma for Tfsv survivors continues for many years, right, and lasts for so long. It's very hard to kind of be bombarded by these kind of ideas all the time when you're trying to recover, right? And so I think a lot of us know the phrase victim blaming. Victim blaming is definitely a type of rape myth, right? It's a way that rape myths can kind of express themselves. So the examples that I gave here, why is she so naive? Why did she send him the nude? Why did she always post these like photos of herself in bikinis and on her Instagram? What does she expect is going to happen? And then some other types of rape myths, will cast doubt on the allegations. Oh, she's just trying to garner sympathy from other people. That's why she's talking about this now. It's very, it feels very wrong to say all these things. And then, yeah, so some of them try to excuse the perpetrator's behavior. So, oh, he was just trying to relieve his stress during his exam period, right? It's not really his fault. And then, some of them try to define sexual violence as a very narrow thing. So men don't experience sexual violence is one of these myths, right? And also what I said previously, which is that physical violence is more serious than other types of violence. So, you know, oh, your photos were shared, but at least you weren't raped, right? I mean, this is all nonsense, right? I just want to make that clear again. So what can we do to combat TFSV? One big thing that Aware has been pushing for a very long time, right, is comprehensive sexuality education, which means education that, you know, talks about consent, actually teaches people what I was talking about earlier, which is what situations have consent and what situations do not have consent. So you know, at what point are you violating somebody's agency and consent. Secondly, you know, one thing that could help is digital literacy. So the difference between public-private accounts, you know, just that kind of internet security, it might help. One thing that we have suggested for Singapore as well is something called the E-Safety Commissioner. So Australia has this, and it is an office that works independently to facilitate takedowns and removals of intimate images, right? And they respond to complaints within 24 hours. So that's quite a quick turnaround time. And so it's found to be, in Australia, this has had quite a lot of success, this E-Safety Commissioner, in helping survivors to take down their images. And then lastly, and I can touch on this more later during the panel, but you know, it's always good to challenge toxic masculinity, which, you know, is kind of the need to assert power over women and girls, right? Which is at the heart of it, what a lot of these sexual violent behaviors revolve around. Okay, so what can survivors do, right, if this has happened to you? So first of all, as already mentioned, Aware runs the Sexual Assault Care Center. You can approach us, you know, through our helplines, our WhatsApp helpline as well, from Monday to Friday. Go to our website, and you can also email us. And just to give an idea of what types of services we provide. So counseling, you know, survivors need a safe space to kind of deal with the trauma emotionally, psychologically, and develop coping strategies, right? We also provide free legal consultation. So we have a legal clinic. You can speak to our volunteer lawyers who have experience with these cases, and they can give you a kind of a brief just overview of your different options. Befriending, which is when our staff or volunteers can accompany survivors to the police, to the court, you know, just to have that kind of emotional support, and also practically just to be like, okay, this is what you can expect. This is what's going to happen. And then lastly, case management, which kind of ties all the other services together and just kind of helps the survivor to plan out the different recovery processes that she's going to be going through with SACC. And I'm not going to have time, I think, to talk about all these different avenues for action that survivors can take, but I want to just focus on the one on the right, the non-legal ones, right? So, you know, you can report to HR if it's a work harassment situation. You can report to your school if it happens in your school, church, etc., right? You can report to external bodies, again, for workplace harassment. Tfsv is it's a government agency that deals with that. And some of the other external bodies below. And then just to quickly say, you know, confront, one of the options that I think a lot of survivors consider is to confront the perpetrator, which can work, it can be successful, but I think it's also quite a risky thing to do. So that's something that I would advise people only do if, you know, they've really thought about the implications, what the consequences might be, what their objectives are in confronting the person. And, you know, again, you can talk to SACC about all these different things before you actually do them. And lastly, similar, you know, you can share your story in public, for example, on social media, but again, it's quite risky. You know, there are different repercussions that you might have to then grapple with. So think about this quite carefully before you do this. Some of the challenges that we have seen that survivors that at SACC have faced in trying to achieve justice over here are, you know, that first of all, it is quite an emotionally taxing endeavor, right? often you have to kind of show the images to different people that you're working with, whether it's the police, or whoever is helping you to facilitate the takedowns, which in and of itself might be a traumatic experience for you. Secondly, there are many loopholes within platforms' policies, so that even the different social media platforms all have their own specific policies, right? There's no like kind of unified policy. So you have to kind of navigate these different policies. Some online platforms are malicious and may extort you. And then lastly, this thing called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. It's a US law, so it's mainly for US websites, and it can be expensive. One of the services that we know, it costs $199 per website to issue the takedown order. Okay, I'm almost done. And lastly, I just wanted to highlight this website that we created this year in conjunction with these researchers. Oh, sorry. It's called solidground.sg. And depending on what has happened to you, you can click on this Find Your Guide page. And then they have these different guides for 9 different scenarios involving online sexual violence. And it gives you a great kind of list of actions that you can take, criminal, whether you want to, pursue like kind of criminal charges, civil remedies, or just kind of figure out what to do on your own. Like, this is a great resource. So I highly recommend it. That's it. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Kelly, for that extremely insightful and data-driven presentation. Before we move on, I would like to remind all those who are present to change your name to the names that you've registered with, so we can identify the registered attendees, and helps with the registration on our end as well. Thank you. So our next speaker is Ms. Farah Begum. Farah is currently working as a case manager in Autism Step, which is an organization for special needs children. Farah graduated with a diploma in psychology from Singapore Polytechnic and is currently pursuing a degree in psychology with business from SUSS. Farah has experience working with mistreated women in a women and children's shelter, learning about how they came to be there and who their abusers were. Farah will be discussing the psyche of an offender and what could make them perpetrate such crimes. Farah, on to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Mohammed, for the share. And good morning, everyone. Okay, let me just share my screen first. All right. So good morning, everyone. Is my voice clear enough to hear? Yeah, okay. All right, so today I'm going to be speaking about the psyche of a voyeur. But we will be going a little bit deeper inside. So there's just a trigger warning that we will be covering content revolving around sexual assault. So just to be prepared. And what we're going to cover today is we're going to identify what makes a voyeur, the disorder that's associated with voyeurism, the theories, the experience of being inside one of the group chats, and how we can possibly eliminate this whole voyeurism from recurring again. All right, so Telegram. So I'm sure many of you have heard of Telegram, and Telegram is a very widely used application. I think they have up to 500 million active new users every day. So Telegram is really pervasive and it's all around the world. And even myself, I'm also a very active user of Telegram, and I normally use Telegram to chat with my friends and to just get updates and pictures. So sometimes, even until today, I do get added into illicit group chats. So when I say illicit group chats, I mean chats that are pretty vice. So they sell things like vape juices, or the most recent one that I had was I was entered into this group where they were selling flavored ice by the grams. So this is pretty concerning. But one of the more relevant ones for today's topic is early in January this year. I was added into, I woke up one morning with my phone pinging with endless notifications. And when I saw, I was actually added into this SG Nasi Lemak group chat without my own knowledge and without my own consent. So please do take note that this wasn't a conscious decision on my end. I was just added into the chat without my own knowledge. And what I saw was women after women being objectified and being punished in a way for wearing things that they wanted, for wearing clothes that they wanted to wear, for wearing clothes that they like to wear. And we are it's pretty concerning as well, because we are in a society which practices free dressing. So being punished in a way for having your pictures taken and uploaded into a chat which you have no control over, just because you dress a particular way is totally unfair, and it's quite bothersome as well. These are actual screen grabs from my phone, and I just while I was doing some research, I went to just take I went to just share try to find some other illicit pages that I could get. And so these are actual successor pages like Nasi Lemak Part 2, Part 3, they might even have a Part 4. And these are pages that has zero barriers to entry. So all you have to do is just go to your Telegram app, just type in the search box SG Nasi Lemak, and it will lead you to these pages. So the barriers of entry are very minimal. There are actually no barriers of entry. So if you are an unsuspecting person, and you just realize that, oh, SG Nasi Lemak, maybe it's a food page, and then you just you just happen to join it, then you're already entering this community where they are practicing a lot of illicit stuff. And yeah, so that is something that is quite worrying as well, because many youngsters are also using Telegram, and you don't know what kinds of content are being shared here. I'm not going to go very deep into this, but these are just actual screen grabs of the actual conversations that transpired during the heydays of SG Nasi Lemak, sharing is caring. But of course, as of now, all these groups are already defunct. But I'm sure such groups still exist. It's just that we don't know the names yet. And if you are able to deep dive a little bit more, I'm definitely sure you'll be able to find a few other pages that do share other illicit content. Yeah. So let's just see what others have to say. What I did was I actually did a very quick research among some people, just to get some views on this whole issue. And I highlighted a few words in red. So these are the words that I want to pay attention to. Girls should be happy. Last time also have. Scroll and see on Facebook. Don't think there's any difference with pornography. And the only one from the female is, I think, twice about what to wear, and become so paranoid. So you see here that there is no discrimination between the races or between the age groups, because generally the male perceptions is gravitated towards it's very harmless. I'm just scrolling, and I'm anonymous, so no one will know that I'm just scrolling. Girls should be happy, we're actually giving them some sort of pedestal maybe. There's no difference in pornography. So some actually even think that voyeurism, like taking upskirt pictures of people, unsuspecting people, that is actually not very different from pornography. But what they do not see is the lasting impact that it has on victims. So essentially the victims that we're looking here are the females. And I only managed to interview one female, and she already said that she thinks twice about what to wear every day. So this is a kind of mental process that she has to go through for the rest of her life, because she never knows if there's someone snooping around. Is there a hidden camera somewhere? Is someone taking a spy cam? So it's like a lasting impact. It's like a lasting trauma for the victims, which are undermined by the perpetrators. And these are actual perspectives of the conversations, that came out during the SG Nasi Lemak, the heydays during the heyday of the Nasi Lemak and Nasi Lemak chat. Sorry, there are 44,321 participants, and during this whole time, one of the things that got a bit more concern for me was that only those who made effort to post fresh stuff can remain inside the chat. What this means is essentially you cannot just be a silent participant, you have to contribute as well. And you have to contribute fresh content. Means, we need new pictures, we need new footage of new girls, more and more girls. So what they're doing is the SG Nasi Lemak actually formed a community where they are circulating many photos and videos of obscenity. And one thing that's very predominantly viewed is that the content are all revolving around women, and men are the ones who run the group chat. All right, so another thing is I just want to bring your attention to all revisiting them later at a later time. All right, so I have actually taken the time to place the names and the age of the perpetrators behind the SG Nasi Lemak group chat. And why I did that is I think we have to have a culture where we have to move towards a culture where we start to name and shame perpetrators, so that victims do not have to blame themselves for encountering things like that. And one of the things that you might also see is that the main perpetrator, the one who ran the group chat, is actually a father of 2 sons. So he is father of 2 young kids. And it does not discriminate against age as well, because you'll see the youngest is a 17-year-old boy. All right, now let's look at voyeurism. Who does it? What is it? We'll be going through these 4 stages. So firstly, the psychological profile of a voyeur. We'll be looking at it through the cognitive theory and the behavior theory. We'll be looking at traits of a voyeur, and we'll also be looking at the voyeuristic disorder. So voyeurism is basically the act of the act of observing people and taking illicit pictures and content of people, of unsuspecting people in places where otherwise they would expect some sort of privacy. Meaning, for example, taking upskirt pictures of a girl in an MRT, or maybe you're just walking at the pavement and then you see someone with maybe really low cleavage, and then you're like, oh, okay, I'm just going to take pictures of that. And what a voyeur does is the voyeur uses these content that he has taken to observe them at a later time and gain some sort of sexual arousal. So that's what a voyeur does. So he observes people, he takes pictures of them, he gets some sort of content. He also shares the content, he circulates the content, and the primary thing here is that the facet that makes it a sexual assault is that he gains some sort of sexual arousal from doing this whole act, or even from watching the content that he has taken at a later time. Okay. All right, so the psychological profile from a cognitive theory, basically cognitive theories try to reason why people behave a certain way using their own thinking. So how does their thinking affect their behavior? And there are certain fallacies that happens here, and one of it is thinking errors or cognitive distortions that we will be talking about even more, which makes them believe that, like what they're doing is completely okay. So they can absolve their humiliation, so the perpetrators don't have to feel any kinds of humiliation or any kinds of responsibility of their deviant acts. And how they engage in cognitive distortions is by the bolded parts below, which is victim blaming. Like, oh, she asked for it, she's wearing so low, or oh, she's not covering her skin, or undermining impacts of their actions. Oh, I'm just harmlessly scrolling through, like there's nothing wrong, I'm just harmlessly looking at pictures, it's okay. A denial of misconduct, or oh, it's just pictures. Where is the misconduct here? Like, where is the misdeed? I'm just taking pictures, there's nothing wrong here. And the very huge one as well is entitlement, which is, okay, this is my phone, so this is my pictures, I get to choose what I want to take and what looks nice to me, what I want to keep for my own future purposes, that's my right. So what they don't see and what they don't, their distortion actually neglects the victim side of sexual assault and voyeurism. All right, so when we look back at the perspectives that I shared earlier, you'll see that I have managed to segregate them into the 3 categories, which are cognitive distortions, like, just the thinking errors, how they justify their behaviors and actions, and the minimizing of perception of harm towards the victims. Very interestingly, one of the ones who, I think the administrative members of SG Nasi Lemak group, the Leonard, so he actually said that, oh, it feels like I've been knighted when he was placed as an admin, when he was given admin rights into the sharing and caring group, which also has a similar agenda to SNL. And this shows a huge cognitive distortion that he's going through, because what he thinks is, oh, I'm being revered, I'm being respected for my position, I'm given due respect for my position, and I'm doing important things. But essentially, it's all just cognitive distortions, and SNL, sharing is caring, are all just for lust, and there is no valid reason why these groups should exist. So the other one is that I would like to bring your attention to is under the justifying behavior and action. Look at the center speech bubble. It says creating an educational platform. So I'm not making this up, but this was the actual admin. Like the group chat rules of Telegram, SNL, and sharing is caring. So they said that, hey everyone, welcome to SNL, welcome to sharing is caring. This is our educational platform for us to enjoy and for us to create content where we can learn and have fun together while we learn. So it's some sort of morbid cognitive distortion that's going on here, where they think that what they're doing, taking pictures of girls, unsolicited pictures of people, uploading them, sharing them, commenting on them, getting sexually aroused by looking at them is actually creating an educational platform. Wow, I mean, it's really, it really shows how much thinking, or maybe how much thinking they have not done before doing this. But yeah, so that's one of the things. And that's how they justify their behaviors and actions, because what they think is, we're just educating the public. We're not doing anything wrong here. What we're doing, essentially, we're just giving you education, and education is important, right? So that's what they think they're doing. And lastly is, this is quite concerning, and this is really sad, especially for the victims, which is they minimize the perception of harm. So one of the things that they said is, oh, okay, this group is for sharing pictures of Singaporean girls. And the first thing that I think about when I think of that is, even me as a girl is not safe here, because they are sharing pictures of Singaporean girls. And if they need fresh content from every new member who's going to join the group, then they probably need to take pictures of every single Singaporean girl in Singapore, so that, you know, the page can keep running and the number of members can keep increasing. So we start, as women, we start to question many things, like, you know, when you go to a hotel room, is there any spy cameras there? If I'm sitting in McDonald's, is anyone bringing their phone, you know, very close to me or at a very weird angle? Do I need to like look out for these signs? And another one that is also quite sad, and that I hope that she has already gotten the support for, is that one of the guys actually said, oh, that's okay, she just got raped, right? It's okay, you can just post the content here, that's fine. So that's totally undermining and minimizing the perception of harm on the victim's part as well. So, you know, getting raped is a huge sexual assault, and that has been imposed on the victim. So I cannot imagine what the girl has been going through and what she must have gone through. So I just hope that she has gotten the support that she needs. All right, so we I think earlier on Kelly also spoke about the Miss V poll, and one of the also bothersome things that we would like to point out is that a few of the people who commented on the poll, or who voted on the poll, are actually asatizas in training. So asatizas are basically religious teachers in training. So they want to train to become the future of the next generation. You know, like the leaders, the Islamic, the religious leaders of the next generation. But on the other hand, you know, so on one side, maybe they read the Quran and they pray, you know, they wake up really early to pray. But on the other side, some of them, I'm not making sweeping statements, but some of them have also voted on the poll, just thinking that maybe possibly engaging in cognitive distortions, like, oh, I'm just doing something very harmless. This is not going to affect anyone. And you know what? No one's going to know. I mean, how are they going to know? No one's going to know, because I'm just doing a random poll. Yes, that is concerning, because now you never know who to trust. You always think that, you know, you look up to a religious person or a religious preacher with respect, because that's someone who probably will be able to guide you. But then now, even people who are very religious or who are devoted to religion also has some sort of cognitive distortions when it comes to these matters. Okay, so now we look at the other prong of the psychological profile, and we are looking through the behavior theory. So this theory is very important in highlighting that sexual assault behaviors are learned, which means that a person is not born with the urge to sexually assault other people. And it's a nurtured response because of repeated exposure of sexually deviant misconduct over time. And one of the ways that perpetrators can actually nurture themselves to become sexual assault perpetrators is watching and observing and consuming content in which the participant is unwilling, or, you know, is unsuspecting and doesn't know, doesn't want to, like what Kelly was speaking about. When there's no consent, somehow it makes it more attractive to them. And when a perpetrator watches over and over and over again, you know, overly consumes content like that, then they start to nurture themselves to want to conduct other sexual assault behaviors towards other people. So here in the behavior theory, what's very interesting is the reinforcement and punishment system, which is that the positive reinforcement of the acts and the absence of punishment encourages reoffenses, or encourages people and more people to just continue offending. So there's a very simple example that I've put here: sexually deviant acts. So the positive reinforcement of gratification, you know, when we're talking about the MIWI poll, when thinking about the asatizas in compromising positions on the poll, plus the perception of the negative consequences. So maybe there are negative consequences, but they are not so. So perhaps the perception of the lack of negative consequences will actually engage the men or the boys to rate on the poll, you know, thinking I can get away with this and no one would know. All right. Okay. Maybe on that note, I would just like to say that in that sense, if we want, as a community, if we do want to stop sexual assault from happening and essentially protect our women in Singapore, we have to really have a very strong punishment system. You know, like a reinforcer for positive behaviors, which are like non-sexual behaviors, and heavily and dutifully punishing any kinds of attempts or any kinds of offences with regards to sexual violence. All right, so when we look at a voyeur, so these are some traits of a voyeur, and we might think that, you know, voyeurs are actually, you know, men that, you know, like mid-aged men, but in truth, it actually begins around 15 years old. That's when, just as they step into adolescence, that's when they start to get more and more curious. And research shows that it predominantly happens amongst males. And the other thing is that, you know, they're very consumed with thoughts on sexual acts, and they view females as potential targets. They view females as lesser beings, and they care very little about the other person, victim, which is what we also saw earlier. So total disregard for victims' feelings, for victims' emotions, and they're overly concerned with protecting themselves and also sexually gratifying their own needs. So of course, as a voyeur, because you're doing things in secrecy, they get some sort of gratification from the secrecy, from the discreetness of the act. And so what they do also is they take footage in the dark, you know, where without the person knowing, in a setting with otherwise expected privacy, especially like, you know, in the toilet cubicle, in a bus. And there is this assertion with power as well. So a voyeur has the idea that he wants to take control of the victim. You know, I want to be able to take pictures of the victim whenever I want to, not have to ask for consent. So that's the kind of power that he perceives that he has. Yeah. All right. We have a diagnostic and statistical manual that we generally refer to when we are trying to diagnose disorders. So there is an official voyeuristic disorder under the DSM criteria, and these are the four criteria that they look out for. Firstly is recurrent intense sexually arousing behavior for 6 months or more. So we're not talking about, you know, just getting overly excited or overly aroused when seeing peeping toms, doing very discreet picture taking for just 1 time, 2 times, but we're looking at a duration as well. So the duration has 6 months or more in order for it to be classified in order for it to be diagnosed as a disorder. And one of the other things as well is that the behavior involves observing obsessively people who are unaware, who are lightly dressed, while they're disrobing, while they're naked. Sometimes it also happens when they are completely clothed. So even when, you know, like they're dressed like with a scarf and things like that, a voyeur or a person with a voyeuristic disorder might start to disrobe the person in his mind. So that is also one of the criteria of getting diagnosed as a voyeuristic disorder. And another one is the creation of fantasies while watching, and significant distress by onset of sexual urges, meaning the impairment of daily functioning, because he's so obsessed and he's so overwhelmed and so consumed with thinking about his sexual urges and, you know, thinking about his fantasies, that he cannot function in his day-to-day tasks, and it really impairs his own daily functioning. Yeah. All right. So here we will look at just a very brief, I think I'm almost done, but here I'm just going to look at a very brief distinction between choice or disorder. So a person can actually show all traits of voyeurism that we saw earlier, you know, like taking pictures like a peeping tom, taking pictures very secretly, observing the pictures, getting sexual arousal. But if they do not fulfill all the criteria of the offender, then they do not have the disorder. However, regardless of disorder, there should be budding zero tolerance. That's what I stand for, towards any kinds of sexual abuse, as well as any projections of such sort of behaviors. All right, thank you so much. I have reached the end of my my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farah. That was certainly very eye-opening. For those of you who have questions, you can drop your questions in the comment section in this Zoom chat, or you can drop an anonymous question in the pigeonhole using the link up here. Okay, and for those who have just joined us, please, we request that you switch your name to the name that you registered with, because there are some sensitive information that are being shared right now. So we would appreciate if we are able to identify you using the registration list. Okay, so now we're moving on to our next speaker, Mr. Muslim Al-Bakri. An introduction for Mr. Muslim. He had spent his early professional years practicing commercial and criminal litigation in one of the big four law firms in Singapore. He established Al-Bakri LLC in 2019, a boutique Singapore law firm specializing in a wide array of both litigious and non-litigious matters. With his vast experience, Muslim will be discussing the criminal implications of offences such as voyeurism, distribution of obscene content, and more, whilst also sharing his own personal experiences conducting a criminal defense for such offences. Mr. Muslim, please.
Thank you, Mohammed, for that kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Muslim Al-Bakri, and I'm a practicing lawyer in Singapore. I sort of cut my teeth doing criminal litigation, both in terms of blue-collar crimes, white-collar crimes, sexual offenses as well. So I'll be speaking today from the legal perspective. I've prepared some slides as well, and I think I'll just work off my slides first. So we've spoken, our distinguished speakers have spoken from the social aspect and the psychological aspect. I'd like to share on changes in the law, right? Developments in the law in the last few years, which sort of reflects the law's, tacit understanding and recognition that it has to continually update itself and develop in order to, meet and tackle these emerging trends. Okay, so I have a lot less slides to go through, so I think we will eventually be back on track. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, and I'm going to try not to repeat what has been said by the other speakers, but as we all know, with the advent of technological advancements, there has been an increasing trend of sexual offenses that are facilitated with the use of technology. Even back 5 to 6 years ago, you're starting to get a lot more sophisticated peeping Tom cases, right? For lack of a better term. These are not just your classic, peeping over a cubicle and all that, but actually using devices, using covert pinhole devices, things that are difficult to detect and things which may not necessarily at the time fall within the definitions of certain types of sexual offenses as they were drafted back then, right? So I'm going to move to my next slide. Right, okay. So basically in this resulted in quite an extensive review and amendment to our main criminal piece of legislation, which is the Penal Code. And what this entailed was an introduction of a whole new spectrum of sexual offenses to cover a wide range of different types of circumstances, offenses, and also to clarify, right, and streamline existing laws, which would, at the time be used to try and cover certain types of offenses to make it clear what they are for and what they're not for. Okay, so as you can see, it was quite a rigorous exercise, right? And some of the introductions into the law and changes are summarized as follows, okay? So let's just go through them very quickly. Now, one of the major ones involved introduction of offenses relating to the sexual exploitation of minors. And this is, and you can take a look at the Penal Code, but there's actually quite a wide gamut of sexual exploitation type offenses. Anything, going from grooming to, indecency exposure to, of intimate recordings, materials to minors, sexual communication with minors and all that. So we can see that the law is trying to catch up with all the different types of exploitative relationships that has come about in the news in the past and all that. Now, on top of that, one could argue that one of the major changes is the introduction of sexual offenses facilitated by the use of technology. And this extends to voyeurism, which previously under the laws prior to these amendments would have been charged under, the offense of outrage of modesty, right? Outraging a modesty, the modesty of a female individual. And of course, in a case like that, it's sometimes a bit difficult to try and fit a certain set of facts into, a very rigid legal definition, because when you talk about outrage of modesty, in terms of criminal prosecution, you do need to prove that there was some intent to outrage the modesty, right? Whereas now, under the new provisions, voyeurism is drafted extremely wide. It is simply defined as observing the doing of a private act without a person's consent. So that in itself is quite reflective of how widely the law wants to cast this net, right? And the laws then go on to specify many different types of circumstances, for example, including equipment, including recording, the type of act that could be observed, the things that can be seen in the act, so the law is trying to be as prescriptive as possible. And I think that was a very positive development in that sense. Besides that, you have offenses introduced relating to the distribution of intimate images, to combat things like revenge porn, extortion using, intimate images taken in a separate context, things like that, and cyber flashing as well, which is sending illicit content and images without one's consent, right? So these are very prescriptive offenses, which, if you look back hard enough, you can potentially see, reports, things in the media over the last 5 to 7 years, which would have in some way influenced the introduction of these new laws, right? And I'll go through some of them later in detail. Now, another thing that was introduced is an enhanced form of punishment, or enhanced level of punishment rather, in where the offenders and the victim were in an intimate relationship, and this sort of is meant, I suppose, to tackle circumstances in which people are giving their consent towards recordings, towards making certain type of content in the context of an intimate relationship, only for it to be used against them at a later stage, right? And the law recognizes that these classes of cases and the people involved in these cases are particularly vulnerable, right? Because they are giving their consent under a whole different context, and it's being used against them. So to see the law taking a harsher stance is quite encouraging in my point of view. Now, I will probably, when I speak, be using the word victim a few times or a couple of times, and that's not to sort of typecast every survivor as a victim, but I just want to emphasize that I'm using it as the legal definition of the word. There has to be an accused person, an offender, and a victim in every criminal offense. Okay, so just coming from the legal background, that's what I'll be using. Yeah. Another thing that was very quite revolutionary, I would say, in the Penal Code is the introduction of offenses relating to child pornography. So now you have in the Penal Code a wide spectrum of child pornography type offenses, starting from the most egregious, which is, production, right? And then, you have trafficking, distributing, and all the way down to, to simple possession. And the penalties are extremely harsh as well. If I remember correctly, you have maximum of up to 5 years imprisonment for just possession of it, right? And I think this is also a very welcome addition to the law, because previously under the law, before these offenses were introduced, people, cases like this would have to go under the Obscene Films Act, the Films Act. Okay, so possession of obscene films and materials, which it's not the same as having, volumes of pornography, which would typically be, fall under obscene films, as having actual and sourcing child pornography material, right? So we can see that the laws, at least the legislature, has been trying to extend the reach of the of criminal law, right, in Singapore to cover these emerging, areas of criminal offences. Okay, now moving on. Besides that, we've spoken a bit earlier about releasing of information online, and certain limitations that are felt, by victims and survivors, especially when their data is posted online and stuff like that, right? And I think Kelly shared about that. Now, in recent times, the law has been trying to provide greater and more immediate assistance, right, and relief to such people. And and that can be seen as well in changes to the Protection from Harassment Act. Now, the Protection from Harassment Act, it is a law that is designed, well, it was a law that was initially designed to offer protection from harassment, right? When it first came about, I think it was in 2014, harassment, as we understood it then, was your basic idea of harassment, workplace harassment, face-to-face harassment, and all that. But that definition and the idea of harassment has sort of evolved, right, over the last few years. And now the Protection from Harassment Act can offer relief in the form of, orders to take down posts, to stop the publication of information, personal information, even if it's not, of an intimate nature, right? And that's sort of to combat the increasing trend of doxing, and also to provide urgent interim relief whilst a case is being sort of decided, right? So as we can see, there are sort of movements in the law which are designed to try and meet these changing circumstances. And I think one thing that it is quite encouraging is that for things like this, we are seeing sort of timely, fairly regular updates to the law, or at least, every few months there seems to be something new that they are trying to introduce to the law, which suggests, an attitude which accepts that, the law has to keep changing, right? To be up to date, to keep track with these perpetrators, right? So I think that's something that is quite encouraging from that sense. Now, the law moving forward. Now, this is an interesting one because if we, some of you might be aware that earlier this year, the Ministry of Home Affairs conducted an extensive review of the sentencing framework, particularly in relation to hurt and sexual offences under the law. This was necessitated by, several high-profile cases, in 2019, 2020, involving university students, right? University students with, offences relating to violence, voyeurism, and so on and so forth, right? Obviously, they received a lot of public outrage because, of this perception that they received more lenient sentences in view of their academic prospects. So this prompted, the ministries to come forward, address them. I think even Minister Shanmugam also made like personal posts on his Facebook and all that. Clearly, there was outrage, a genuine outrage from a very personal level. This has sort of moved into the law, okay? Because there is a change. There's a shift in perception in how certain arguments are now run under the law. Okay, it's not simply the case that someone can come to court and argue that he is a candidate with high rehabilitative prospects simply because he's in university, right? And this, what I have here in the slides is a portion of the speech that was lifted from Minister K. Shanmugam's ministerial statement on 5th of March. And what he's saying essentially is that mitigation pleas, which is what, basically mitigation is the act of coming to court and asking for a more lenient sentence, right? So mitigation pleas based on the offender's educational qualifications or academic potential should not carry much weight. For such offences, principles of proportionate punishment and deterrence should generally take precedence over rehabilitation. This means that if you touch a woman inappropriately without her consent, if you upload intimate images of an ex-girlfriend or any other woman, if you video record a woman showering, you must face serious consequences in law, and you should not be able to come to court and say you have a bright future, you will go far and so on. You can go far, but first serve the sentence. And I believe he said this to rapturous applause by the rest of the parliament. But yeah, I think that sort of shows, it reflects a change in perception, right? In the laws, and the law is meant to sort of reflect public sentiment, right, and public outrage. So it is positive to see that these kind of changes are also happening in the attitudes in law, and it will definitely trickle down to the courts, into the courts' decision making as well, right? I think just one more interesting point that I wanted to mention earlier is that, when we talk about how the law sort of adapts to these kind of public, changes in public sentiment and stuff like that, I think Farah shared, a very helpful definition and understanding of the traits of a voyeur, and what that sort of encapsulates, what that sort of entails, right? But interestingly, under the law, the legal definition of voyeurism is not as strong, right? We have case law in which the courts in Singapore have sort of conclusively come to the position that voyeurism is really no more than a perverse behavioral option. Okay, I'm quoting here, and it is a perverse behavioral option that does not deprive a person of self-control. So the law actually looks at it very, very suspiciously. Okay, voyeurism is in some circles a medical disorder, and the law understands that. But for the purposes of the law, the legal definition does not just adopt that arbitrarily, right? It takes a very, very dim view of voyeurism in the sense that people may have certain impulses that arise, in the context of voyeurism, but it is not sufficient to deprive them of self-control, and therefore it is not in itself a medical disorder that warrants leniency or rehabilitative potential in itself. So that's quite interesting, right? Because there may be a medical definition and all that, but whether the law chooses to accept that and adopt that, right, is an entirely different question. Okay. Okay. Now, my final slide, following on from just now, where I mentioned that the ministries undertook a quite substantive review of the sentencing framework. What we do know is that they will be introducing a few other changes into the law as well. For example, a new bill was introduced into Parliament earlier this year, which seeks to expand on certain key areas in sexual offences. Now, some of the more interesting changes that will be coming into the law is that there will be an increase in penalties for 3 types of sexual offences, namely the outrage of modesty, sexual activity in the presence of a minor, and showing a sexual image to a minor, right? Beyond that, it also seeks, the amendments that will be introduced into the law also seek to broaden the scope of offences involving the use of deception during sex, by extending the offence to cover a person who induces through deception or false representation the victim to consent to being touched sexually by a third person. Now, I think it's pretty interesting as well, because you remember just now I mentioned earlier that if you look hard enough, you do tend to find cases reported, in the law, which seems to be perhaps the catalyst to some of these changes. And I was doing the research for these slides and looking at these proposed changes, and immediately, I can think of some that come to mind. Like, for example, I think last year there was this quite a novel, well, at least it appeared to me quite novel, quite a novel case in which a male offender had, through deception, sort of, caused his partner or his girlfriend to be involved in a threesome, which she was not aware of, right? Because I think, she was blindfolded or whatever. But that sort of idea of, utilizing deception to get her to consent to having sex with another person is precisely the type of offense that these provisions are aimed at tackling, right? So I think, there is some form of cause and effect when it comes to the law. And that is actually, to me, the most encouraging thing, because the law is not perfect, right? And there's a lot more that can be done especially for the victim, going, in trying to get that justice in the first place, right? The law has all these punishments in place, but the process in trying to get that justice, going through the authorities, still a lot of gaps there. There's still a lot of problems there. But it is encouraging to see, at least in my view, I think it's encouraging to see how the law is trying to adapt, right? And looking at actual cases that have been reported and seeing how they are reflected in the changes in the law, to me is a good step forward, I think. Okay, so I think my time is up, and I will answer any other questions that come about in the panel session. Then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muslim, for the sharing. That was indeed very illuminating on Singapore's take, Singapore's law, Singapore's take on the voyeurism in Singapore, on the law's take of voyeurism in Singapore. Sorry about that. Okay, our next speaker is Miss Chris. Chris had a good relationship with her partner of a few years, as with most couples. They had a loving and intimate relationship. On occasion, they filmed their acts of intimacy, but unfortunately, one of their phones was compromised and a video of them was leaked online. To date, it is unknown who uploaded the video. Chris suffered from shock and humiliation, unable to go out in public for fear of recognition. The culprit was never caught, depriving her of the chance of closure. As time passed, Chris learned to be at peace with what had happened. She now speaks about her experience to support other survivors. Chris, please.
Hi, can y'all hear me? Can y'all hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess it all started when, during that relationship, I was 19 to 20 years old, so that's about like 6 to 7 years ago. So my first experience from that same relationship was actually when a photo of me got out on Tumblr. So way before we actually experienced Telegram, there was Tumblr, and Tumblr was the place where a lot of people were doing these things, sharing all these photos. So I wouldn't say that my ex-boyfriend is the culprit behind it, because when that first incident happened, we were both actually super blindsided. I know a lot of my girlfriends would think that it was my ex-boyfriend who did it, but we were super devastated, and he was actually even more devastated than I was. So that actually convinced me that, I don't think it was him. I just think that his phone was compromised because I didn't keep any of those materials, after I sent it to him. So being in a digital age, I think it's normal that we tend to send, news or tend to film our intimate acts, with our partner. I know there are lots of other couples who do it, but the problem is in terms of consent. So fast forward 2 years, and that incident I didn't report to the police because I wasn't confident that it was going to be handled properly. I managed to get Tumblr to take it down, but I was also convinced because that the police weren't going to handle at that point of time, because there are a lot of NS men who are posted to all these police stations, and I didn't trust the people at the front, helping me lodge the report and everything. So fast forward a few years, so October last year, so then a friend actually DM'd me on Instagram, and she told me that her husband actually received in his WhatsApp group with all of his friends that that my video with that same particular ex-boyfriend in their WhatsApp chat. So I was actually quite confused. My initial response was I was quite confused because this from the time between the Tumblr incident to now, though I didn't hear about anything getting out. And Amira knows this as well because she has been with me on this journey. The healing, trying to make sure that nothing gets out. We were actively scoping together with one other friend of Amira's. We were actively scoping Tumblr and all these pages together. And Amira also has ever accompanied me to the police station as well. So when it came out, late last year, I was, just if this person or whoever had the material from the same relationship that I had, why didn't it just come out back then? Yeah, why now? So like why 5 years, 5 to 6 years later? So of course I took it as revenge porn lah, because when that incident happened, it was also when me and my current fiance, we actually started to be a bit more public with our relationship on Instagram. So I mean that was my point of view, that was my perception, that's how I felt. But I didn't go to the police straight away because at that point of time I was dealing with a lot of stuff. Late last year I realized that there were a lot of people actually grieving with the loss of their loved ones because of COVID and because of other situations. So personally, for me, I was actually grieving the loss of a friend who is my fiance's best friend, and then not long after that was my grandfather. So I had no time to actually grieve the whole situation. So only at the start of this year, I think it was January, after we got engaged, then I could actually go to Cantonment and report the whole situation. But of course, as mentioned in the introduction just now, that the culprit isn't caught, because the thing about it being on the internet is that once it's out there, you can never really retract it, And internet is one thing, and then we have all these WhatsApp groups, Telegram groups where it's circulating around. So it was quite hard for me because, not quite hard, I'm downplaying it. It was very hard for me because, having to sit through the interrogation, especially when my IO is male himself. I mean, they were quick to actually respond because, like, when I went to Cantonment to report it, I immediately met IO after that. From my experience in my previous domestic abuse case, like, I waited like really, really long and no one ever got back to me. But this time, I can see the efforts. They're actually more swift, in responding to such cases. So, but of course, it was actually, traumatizing to, go through the entire interrogation process. But I'm glad that, I have, my friends, to support me, my fiance to support me, and, people to actually accompany me, when I need them to. So, of course, being in public, not only in public, but on social media and stuff, because it was, it caused a lot of anxiety, it caused a lot of mood swings in a way. Yeah, I wasn't in a good place, wasn't in a good mental space. And because there were lots of random guys with no mutual friends on Instagram or whatsoever, like they were just randomly just following me on Instagram, and that just added on to like the anxiety. So for a while, I actually, I couldn't bring myself to go out, and I couldn't bring myself to actually face a lot of or talk to my guy friends as well, because me being, an engineering student back in poly, I had a lot of, guy friends. And, my girlfriends, the circle is very, very small because, I just stick to the same circle of girlfriends. But my guy friends, even though they're acquaintances or good friends, they are quite far, So I struggled, because I started to question, like, are they talking to me because, they know what's going on, or, or are they just genuinely talking to me? But in some cases, in my group chat, with some old friends, like, from being talked to like a bro in a way, they started to be more cheeky towards me. So, it raised a lot of questions for me, and it was just, it was a terrible time. But eventually, and going out was the worst, because even though I was wearing a mask, like, now COVID, we're all wearing masks, I would still get like stares from people, and especially like Malay guys, because from what, I mean, I'm a Malay woman, and I'm pretty sure lots of Malay men have seen the video before, because it has, the last I checked on the website before they took it down, it racked up to like 80,000 views. And so, and then, but eventually I made peace with it, because I told myself that, there's nothing I can do to retract the video. But I shouldn't be ashamed that my video is out there because I wasn't the one who put it out there, and that was actually meant for like, it was done in privacy. So these people that are sharing like my videos, like spreading it, this and that, they're all doing it without my consent. And so that just, reflects a lot on them instead of me. Because these people some people that I know that actually have seen the video or talk about the video, they are married men, they are, engaged men, they have girlfriends, and some of them are already fathers. So that's actually the bigger issue instead of me being out there and like my body being exposed without my consent. So there's a deeper underlying issue, and that's how I think I made peace with it. Yeah, and telling myself that no, it's not my fault because it was just meant to be private in the first place. So the trauma wasn't easy. Getting over it wasn't easy, but probably because of my experience with domestic abuse and how I got over it, I think that's why I got more strength to overcome this situation this time. So I think. But questions, I think I'll save it for the panel discussion later. I guess that's all I have to share.
Thank you, Chris, for stepping up to share your story. I'm sure all of us here are in awe of your courage and strength to be able to go through all of that. So before we start the panel discussion, let me introduce to you our moderator, Mr. Alfian Ismail. Alfian is trained in social work and has been working at AMP Singapore for almost a decade. He enjoys discussing current issues and engaging in discourse. Without further ado, let's get Alfian, get the ball rolling.
Thank you very much, Muhammad. Welcome again, everyone, to this particular session today. Wow, after sitting in through 4 presentations, listening to very, very interesting sharings from our panel speakers, I'm sure all of us are wowed with the information that they have shared. But I am just so honored that I am the one moderating the next segment, which I'm sure all of us are looking forward to. That is the Q&A segment. I just like to make a qualification over here, or I just like to highlight this over here, that when I moderate sessions like this, I will not just limit the session for Q&A. Okay. I will open up the floor for people to even make comments and have conversations with the speakers. So before we go about doing this, I'd just like to reiterate on how we're going to go about. First of all, we have received a list of questions from Pigeonhole, and thank you for that. And I'm going to read some of the questions and pose the questions to our panel. But I'd like to reiterate over here that this will only be my second option. My first option is I'm going to open up the floor and invite any one of you to ask your questions directly to our panel. Okay, all right. If you feel that your questions haven't been given the attention it deserves, then I would strongly urge you to unmute yourself and ask the question on your own. All right, let's get the ball rolling. The first question, and me, because I'm the moderator, I have the privilege of asking the question first. I would like to have the question that I have in mind. And the first question that I have, I would want to pose it to Kelly. Give me a moment. Let me just ask the question. Kelly, so you mentioned about the need for us to combat Tfsv, and this can be done through challenging toxic masculinity, right? So from a West perspective and observation, how prevalent is this phenomena today, this toxic masculinity phenomena?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Yeah, so I know that the phrase toxic masculinity can be a bit contentious, and I just wanna, say that first and foremost, we can call it different things. I know some people prefer to say like unhealthy masculine norms, unhealthy conventions around masculinity, but basically we're all talking about the same thing, right? Which is that, and I think this also kind of gets at the heart of what causes sexual violence, right? And why sexual violence is committed mostly by men towards women, right? I think, in our society, in the world that we live in for centuries, right, we've been teaching boys from a very young age that the way that they can express their gender, that the way that they can, show themselves to be masculine is to be strong and perform, dominance and assertion of power over other people, right? And this is how you prove yourself as a man. And obviously there's nothing inherently toxic about strength or dominance or power, right? Those things can be good. But I think when we make it the kind of like the primary expression of who you are, it can go to extremes, right? And those extremes become unhealthy for the people around the men, so the women and the girls, because they are the ones who kind of have to then suffer, these expressions of power and dominance at the hands of the men. But it's also unhealthy for men because, boys and men should not feel the need to constantly be strong and powerful, right? I mean, that's just not realistic in terms of human emotions, right? I mean, we don't need to be like that all the time. So what we find is that, toxic masculinity or this kind of emphasis on certain traits of masculinity does kind of underlie the entire, activity of violence and sexual violence. And these are, I think what's important to remember, and Farah kind of touched on this in her presentation as well, is these are not innate traits, right, that we're all born with, right? These are things that we will learn, that we were taught. And so I think if we think about that, that gives us some hope that if we have learned this, we can also unlearn it, right? And we can learn alternatives. So if we teach boys and men that they do not have that their gender and their identity is not really centered on these things, hopefully that means that we can raise a new generation of boys and men to not feel the need to exert power and control over other people, whether it's through sexual violence or whether through other forms of violence or just other forms of competition. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yes, definitely. I feel that it is going to be a constant and ongoing effort to educate and re-educate, especially when it comes to our male counterparts, when it comes to this particular phenomena of toxic masculinity. Okay, now I'd like to pose some questions from the pigeonhole. Okay, so we gained 5 votes in this particular question. In this technological age where sexualized content is seen to be the norm, how do we educate the younger generation on boundaries? I think I'd like to pose this question to all three, Muslim, Kelly, as well as Farah. Is that okay? Who wish to go first?
Hi, can I start? Okay, I think I'll just...
Sure.
All
right. So this is a question.
Okay, I think one of the pertinent things here that we're talking about is basically the education of younger generation and how education is basically like when we want to teach the younger generation are modeling and they're just basically following what they see the elder generation doing. Let me just give a very, very simple example. So for example, I have this family friend, this distant family friend, and the son is about 6 years old. And he has started to show a little bit of a passive-aggressive behaviors towards females around him, and a deep observation into that actually led me to see that the boy's father, a 40-year-old guy, was also doing the same things to the mother. So that is how we educate our younger generation to show passive aggressiveness, or to start to start showing signs of sexual violence or violence in essence. Yeah, so I think modeling behaviors is a very good place to start, especially like nowadays, a lot of us are becoming parents and we have children. It's on us now to start to show the younger generation the right way of of speaking with women, of speaking about women. So when we watch a TV show together and we see women dressed in whichever way they want to, we don't say, oh wow, she's so sexy. We don't have to say things like that. We can actually omit comments like that. So when you do that, what you're doing is essentially you are trying to build the basis of foundation in the young kids' minds, and kids are very, very impressionable. So like what I shared earlier, sexual assault, sexual violence behaviors do not start when they're 30 years old. The onset actually already starts at 15 years old. And the brain, the brain goes through like a booming, an explosion of learning when it's like 3 to 4 years old. So that as parents, as educators, as people of who are going to guide the next generation, I think it's really on us to model, to model effectively, to say the right things. Yeah, so that we teach the younger generation what things you can say. For example, if you see like someone dressed in an outfit, that to another person might look very skimpy, like, oh wow, I really like the color. So you could comment on something that is completely not related to how sexy it is or how scantily it is. But you can say things like, oh, the color is really nice, or the pattern is really nice, or even better, just don't comment on dressings at all. Yeah, so I think that's how we could gear towards educating younger generation on boundaries. Yeah, maybe we could even start from a place where we just don't comment on people's appearances. We just don't comment on people's dressings. Like maybe some people wear the scarf really, really long, and some they wear the scarf with a little bit of hair showing. Well, that's their personal choice. So why not we just start from a place where we just don't comment on people's dressings at all? Yeah, thank you. I think I would like to hear what Muslim and Kelly have to say about.
Yes, Muslim. Maybe from the legal perspective, especially with the recent revision of our laws.
Thank you, Alfian. Thanks for inviting me to answer this question. But honestly, I have to qualify by saying, but I'm probably the least nurturing and sort of parenting person here. I don't have kids myself or anything like that. So, when you ask me how I would educate the younger generation, it's honestly, it stumps me a bit because I don't really know myself. I think Farah brought up some good points on behavior modeling. If I were to offer a very sort of simple and humble, input to that, I think I think there could be some improvements, right, in how we sort of speak and converse with our young, and not sort of just like put everything in a corner and just like not talk about it. And I speak on that coming from a background and community where it is quite common not to invite conversation on certain things, on certain sensitive things, especially coming from a Muslim background, Malay background. I don't know whether it's a common experience for everyone, but I felt like it is quite a hallmark of my upbringing to not question certain things, right? Take it as a law, right? Take it as this is just the rules. But I think that can be counterproductive sometimes, and as it grows along, it can manifest itself in very unhealthy ways. So I think one thing that needs to be done is to increase conversation from a younger age, and that really is, to me, a necessity, especially because our younger are becoming smarter and smarter at a younger age as well. They're being exposed to more mature things that I probably wouldn't have been exposed to till I was, my late teenagehood or in my 20s, whatever. So I think that's just one aspect that could be improved. Again, I'm not a parent, so I apologize for a very poor answer.
It's okay. I thought that with the recent revision of the laws, right? I thought more grassroots efforts need to be done, to educate, especially the younger generation. Maybe through assemblies in schools or in IHLs as part of the onboarding process before they enter university. That what are some of the do's and don'ts, especially with the technological advancement, right? And with the revision of the laws. So they should be updated in terms of how they should carry themselves amongst their peers.
I think it's a great idea. It could be hugely contextualized to their experiences nowadays, right? Everyone has a cell phone and things like that. So if that education can be can come in at a grassroots level, at an institution level, it could be very helpful. Helping people understand what is against the law, what are the rules and what are the laws, and what kind of offenses could arise, knowingly or unknowingly as well. Yeah, it's a great suggestion, Alfian. You answered your own question.
Okay, the next question for Chris and Kelly. With the recent revision of the law, do you think that's enough for now?
Yeah, so we're talking about the review of the sentencing frameworks and
exactly.
Right. Yeah, so I think, Aware had, quite mixed feelings on this as a whole. So I think on the one hand, we agree, right, that obviously academic potential and a lot of these other kind of irrelevant factors should not really come into play at all, right, when we're talking about sentencing. In the end, the question is, did you commit violence, right? And I mean, yeah, I think we can safely say, well, okay, I don't want to say, but yeah. But I think one area that we were maybe a little bit less sure about is actually the kind of focus on increased penalties, right? Because I think one perspective that we have is that actually we're not totally sure that there is enough evidence to show that increased penalties do actually effectively deter potential perpetrators. So that's something I think that we are kind of looking for more evidence for before we want to, before that's something that we want to support. One additional kind of idea or thing to think about when it comes to that is that actually some of the survivors that we've spoken to at SACC hesitate to make reports because they know, because, like I said, most people know the perpetrator, right? And so it's someone in your life. It could be your coworker, it could be your friend, it could be your boyfriend, your husband, right? And a lot of times, especially if it is your husband, your father, someone that you're dependent on in your family, right? You don't necessarily want them to suffer, increased penalties or any kind of penalty, right? Because it affects your life, it affects the people around you, right? And sometimes even if you're not dependent on them, you still don't want them to have to, go to jail for however long, right? So I think that's something that has given some of our survivors some pause as well when it comes to whether or not they report. So that's something that I think we're still kind of like, the jury is still out for us whether increased penalties really is the best way to deal with it. Yeah.
Thanks, Kelly. Do you have anything to add, Chris? Yes.
The question was, sorry, can you repeat the question again?
My question is that with the recent revision of the law, is it enough from the legal perspective to deter sexual violence related offences, from perpetrating?
I think compared to previously, I think things are actually improving. From the time where, how do I say it? Okay. Because my point of view is not so much of, the charges or like the consequences or the sentences that these offenders actually face. It's more of also like what Kelly shared on her slide is now what Australia has, that E-Safety Commission. When I first encountered my photo on Tumblr, I also had the same question, like why doesn't Singapore have the same, have that community or that commission to actually police our internet or scope our internet for all these, obscene materials or all these sensitive and intimate materials that are being put out there without consent. But I guess from the legal perspective, that for me as a survivor, I think that there could be heavier, sentences for, offenders. Because sometimes I feel that, people will use mental health as a way to get away from the action. But so I think there has to be, we are on track. I feel that we are on track, but yeah, there has to be greater reinforcement for this.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, we hope your voice is heard, and we look forward to a safer society moving forward. Yeah, okay. At this moment, I'd like to include our audience in. Anyone who'd like to unmute himself or herself and ask your questions directly, you may ask the question you have put in the pigeonhole, or you may even ask your own question, which just come to mind. All right. So if there isn't, I'll just refer to the question that has been coming in. I see active voting going on right now, and that's very good. Now I'd like to ask this particular question to all our panel members, right? So this question with 5 votes. What do I do if I'm accused of sexual assault? What are my defenses? This question I think is interesting because now it sheds or it highlights the perpetrator who has been accused right? So how do we tackle this? Or is a person who is accused of this, will he be confident that the system will also be impartial?
Okay. I guess I should try and give that a shot. Okay, so sexual assault is sort of an umbrella term in which there can be different types of sexual offenses under the Penal Code, right? So you have everything running up from rape to sexual assault by penetration, sexual assault of a minor, things like that, right? In terms of general defenses that are typically included under the law, they don't these defenses don't squarely apply, right? Because under the Penal Code, you have defenses such as right of private defense, which would apply more in the context of physical violence. You have insanity, right? You have diminished responsibility, provocation, all of which don't really squarely fit in the context of sexual offenses. You can't be provoked into committing a sexual offense. It just doesn't, it's not legally tenable, right? So I guess the defense really comes in from a factual perspective. Was there actually consent, right? Did it actually happen? Is it a bare denial? Right, like these are the kind of defenses that I would, at least as a lawyer, right, seek to explore with my client in the context of a sexual assault. Now, it is quite common, I suppose, in cases like this, that it is one person's word against the other, right? There is often very little objective, extrinsic evidence to prove the crime. So I guess if we're looking at it from an accused person's perspective, one thing to take comfort in is that the law will elevate the threshold that is required, right, in order to convict, where it is one person's word against the other, right? Where there's no evidence, the law expects the testimony, the recollection of the complainant to be, very, very precise, to be not inherently incredible, right? It is quite a high standard that is required, and that is sort of the law trying to safeguard against the interest. To safeguard the interests of the accused person. So I guess that is something to take comfort in. Generally, in these kind of cases, my experience, it would be a very factual inquiry, right? If you say this happened, it involves a very deep examination of all the facts surrounding what that happened, and really scrutinizing and picking apart that testimony. Of course, it's unpleasant as well. It can be quite unpleasant as well for the complainant. But that is, I suppose, what the law expects, right? In affording a proper and fair trial to every accused person. Yeah.
Thanks, Muslim. I'll get back to that question. I'll give way to Nurliana. Nurliana, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yep. You all can hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So my question is basically to Mr. Muslim. If the rape, what are the chances of like a rape survivor to get her justice under the law of Singapore and to feel safe? At the same point of time, like we cannot get, because of the crime that happened, protection comes after that. Like if you cannot even get a PPO, because a rape survivor
Sorry, Nurliana, I think you're breaking up a bit. So I got the first part of your question, which was, what are the chances that a rape survivor can get justice?
Is a violent one. How do you know that he's really want to keep can get justice? But at the same point of time, we cannot even get a PPO because of the length, the number of years that the crime has happened. You see, so
right, the time lapse.
The length of the violence. So like how then the time lapse. So like how then can we protect ourselves? We cannot even get a PPO for rape survivors out there. Do you
Okay.
get what I'm trying to ask?
Okay,
I'm
so
sorry,
let me
I'm
just
shaking. I'm shaking really bad.
no, it's fine. It's fine. I think I got your question, but let me just repeat it just so that we're on the same page. Okay. So you're asking, how is it possible? What are the chances of a rape survivor getting justice? I suppose in the context of getting justice for the rape, right? What you're saying, right?
Yes.
When on the other hand, that same survivor would encounter difficulty getting a protection order or a PPO because the length of time is does not suggest that a PPO is warranted. Is that your question?
Yes. Could you put it better? Sorry. Yeah.
It's okay. I mean, that's my job. I'm a lawyer, so don't worry about it. Okay, so yeah, is this a question that is sort of based in of personal knowledge or something like that?
I'm going through it, so I am actually I am.
What I'd say is that the legal elements that you would need to satisfy for both to get justice in both those two instances are quite different, right? You know, what the prosecution would need to prove or what you need to show in order to prove that, you know, a rape had taken place is quite different than what you'd have to show in a PPO case, right? And of course, how the authorities would treat that is quite different as well, due to the seriousness of the offense and the consequences that are attached to such offense under the law. So I would like to believe that the authorities on the first instance would treat it quite differently. In fact, I know from personal experience, when you talk about PPOs, and PPOs only arise in the context of a family, sort of family violence, in the context of a family setting. So just to backtrack very, very quickly, PPO arises in a family context that is different from the Protection from Harassment Act, which arises in any context, right? Harassment in any context. So PPO is just in a family context under the Women's Charter. So I know for a fact that when it does come to try and getting PPO family disputes, the police have shown in the past a tendency to refrain from acting because it's a family kind of dispute. I don't know what is the basis for that, but that seems to have been the case, at least from clients that I've encountered and stuff like that. Whereas when you talk about a serious sexual offense like rape, the police do tend to be a lot more invested in that investigation. Okay. In fact, I have been in situations, as a lawyer where the authorities have proceeded against the accused person, even though there's zero evidence and the story doesn't even make sense. So that, in a way, has demonstrated a zealousness on the part of authorities as well to really pursue and get to the bottom of these things. So in my view, there is still a very good chance that a rape survivor can get justice under the law, especially when you are comparing it with a PPO application. To me, it wouldn't really relate to each other. The chances that a rape survivor will get justice will depend on the merits of that complaint. And I mean, I hope you can take comfort in the fact that, at least in my experience, I do see the authorities taking it quite seriously. Besides the changes in the law in terms of the substantive laws, what I didn't mention as well is that, what we hear from Parliament and all that is that the police are undergoing more training, to better deal with investigations for where sexual offenses are concerned, trying to streamline their process so that it doesn't have to take more than one interview. So they don't have to keep recounting it to the authorities, to different IOs, right? All that is counterproductive. So internally, there is sort of an effort to try and streamline that process. I think also there is some form of volunteer care support as well under the MHA now for victims of trauma and sexual offenses as well. So, I think you can hopefully take comfort in the fact that they would take it very seriously. they would definitely take it more serious than a PPO case. And anyway, the facts that you would require for a PPO case would not necessarily satisfy what you need to require for a rape case anyway. So I wouldn't be too concerned about the two overlapping in that sense. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah. Thank you. Can. All right.
Thank you, Liana, for that question. Okay, the time now is 12:01. We actually do not have much time. So I will ask one last question. But before I ask, I would like to give the opportunity to the audience. If you do have that one question, I will give it to you. You can ask that question and we'll discuss that. Anyone would like to ask question? None? Okay, if there isn't, then I'd like to pose this question next to our speakers. This particular question, I have been added and contacted by many different users on Telegram. Many times I've been sending explicit content and suggested activities without consent. So how do I protect myself from this? What can they do? Who is best? Kelly, is there any way where could educate the member of public on how members of public could prevent or protect themselves from being exposed to such invitations?
I'm not sure. So I wonder if Farah might want to answer this, just because she seems to have, the most kind of personal experience using as a Telegram user herself. This one is something that, I think it's a good question, because I think what this question kind of suggests is that, when we think of perpetrators and victim survivors, right, those are not the only people who are affected, right? Or maybe the person whose photos it is not the only victim of this action, right? Because other people might be kind of suffering some kind of secondhand or secondary trauma by being like, oh, I did not expect to be exposed to this. Like, oh my gosh, what am I looking at? That's also quite disturbing. But yeah, I mean, I have to say that we don't really see so many cases of this. We see mostly cases of people whose photos it is. So yeah, I mean, in terms of, I guess changing your settings on Telegram or something like that, I suppose there are probably things that can be done. I don't know for sure.
Thanks, Kelly. Yes, Farah, is there anything that we could do to protect ourselves?
Actually, in my opinion, I'm also undergoing this difficulty, because like what I shared earlier, I was also put into the SG Nasi Lemak group chat without my knowledge, and then currently I'm just today morning I checked and I was in this group selling drugs. So yeah, and in no way did I purposely choose to find these chats or willingly try to join the chats, but I'm just somehow added into the chat. So I would only say, like, one of the things that we do is when we consume any kind of media, media literacy is very important. So of course, when we do get added into Telegram group chats that we do not want to be in, and we do see like there are illicit content, so I think the first step to do would be reporting it and then making your way out. So like what I do is I always just exit the groups. Yeah. I mean, immediately once I see that I'm inside these group chats, I just exit. But for the Nasi Lemak group chat, I'm really happy that it got reported. So if anyone in like amongst us do get placed into group chats that compromise other people, that are sharing content of other people without their consent, or sharing like videos, images that we know, it's totally inappropriate, and we know it's not fair for the other people to be viewed this way, in this light, in front of so many people, then I think we can just take that step to report these pages, and then also make your way out. So just exit the group chat, because honestly, I don't really have any other kinds of advice. Yeah.
Thanks, Farah. I think there is also very valuable information sharing by Nurfika over here on how we can change our settings and adjust ourselves and ensure that our privacy will not be compromised, especially in the platform of Telegram, right? Okay, I think we have come to the end of our Q&A section. But before we leave, I would like to invite one last time if there are any last words from our panel speakers before I hand this segment over to our MC.
Yeah, I can share a bit more. I mean, so just very quickly, because we did talk about kind of grassroots education, kind of community initiatives. So to just promote some of what we do a little bit. I'm just putting in the chat here the link to something called Birds and Bees, which is a program that we are running for parents. It's actually a parent sex education workshop. So, you know, exactly what the other panelists said, right? Sometimes there's quite a lot of like hesitation, reluctance to talk about some of these more difficult issues like sex, relationships with, you know, with their kids. So what we're doing with this workshop is trying to introduce some skills, strategies, communication strategies to start from quite a young age, right? To talk about just things like consent, things that don't have to necessarily be sexual, but can apply to other aspects of a kid's life, right? Even from very young age, like 5 or 6 years old. So just trying to teach people how to introduce these topics to the kids slowly, gradually, age appropriately, of course, and then kind of to complement what they learn or what they don't learn in school, right? And another thing that we ran very quickly, I'm sorry, is called the Sexual Assault First Responder Training. Not sure if anyone here has heard of it. We've been doing it for a few years now. So what it does is to teach people, members of the public who are bystanders or who might be friends or family members to survivors, teach them what kinds of things they can do to provide support that's non-judgmental, you know, empathetic, sensitive, informed. Because I think what we've learned is that a lot of people, when survivors approach their friends and family, a lot of times they do get the victim blaming response, and that discourages them from reporting, right, or kind of moving forward to seek help. So we know that the first response is super important, and when the person is supportive, is empathetic, you know, is non-judgmental, it makes a huge difference. So we teach other people how to respond when the people in their lives have been sexually assaulted. I'll also put the link in the chat, but yeah, sorry, just wanted to quickly drop those things that are I think very relevant to the conversation that we had today.
Thank you very much, Kelly. I think those information that you just said are very, very relevant and very, very helpful. As organizers, we'll definitely follow up on whatever that has been shared to be shared to our audiences who have made time and effort to attend for today's event so that they're able to follow up with all those initiatives that are currently out there in our community today. And with that, I would like to thank all our panel speakers for their contributions in today's session, and I will hand back the segment today to our MC, that is Muhammad. Thank you very much.
I have some words to say. Hello.
Oh yeah, sorry, Chris, I'm so sorry. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I just wanted to address this last part, because I understand that you know, sexual assault, sexual violence, and all these being very common these days. A lot of us are actually survivors of it. So I understand, yes, this question, how can I be of support towards the partner who has been through this, right? So, I mean, if your partner is not, you know, comfortable with sharing it, it's important to know not to force it. But if they are comfortable sharing it, it's very, very important to know that you know, it takes a lot of patience, you know, and a lot of emotional support. So, you know, you have to understand, you know, the story, you know, what they went through, and especially the triggers, because it's not going to always be a smooth ride. You know, there will be days where they spiral, and you have to ensure that you are ready for that. You know, you can't just tap out when, you know, just because you don't feel like it. You know, if it's a partner, because, you know, love is not just saying I love you, it's a whole lot of things. So, other than that, I think the most important part is actually understanding triggers. Yeah, and especially with respecting when they say they're not comfortable with being in this environment or meeting this kind of people. So it takes a lot of listening and understanding. Yeah, lots of emotional support. It can be emotionally taxing, but at the end of the day, I think it's important to tell yourself that, hey, you know, I haven't experienced this. You know, I wouldn't want to experience this, and I should be, you know, there for people who need me the most, those who have experienced it, because it's really not an easy process to get through. Yeah. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Chris. Any last words from our other two panel speakers? None? Okay, all right. We note of the various questions that has been put up over Pigeonhole. We want to rest assure everyone that the questions will not be left unattended. What we'll do as a follow-up as organizers, we'll try to follow up with our speakers to see how those questions could be addressed, and then we'll follow up individually with the person or the group, the audience who have put up these questions, so that all questions will be addressed. Okay, and that's it with our Q&A segment. The time now is 12:11, and I'll pass it over to our MC of the day, Muhammad. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfian, and thank you everyone for the insightful panel discussion and Q&A session. I'm sure that all of us are more, if not more enlightened about all these issues pertaining to modern voyeurism. We hope that today's session has brought you more clarity on the issues and also the online crimes that cause a great concern in today's time, and understand more about voyeurism as a whole. So please don't go yet, because we would like to thank our event partners for their support. They are Aware Singapore and Al Bakri LLC. And we would also like to thank our co-organizer, Improv SG. We have now come to the end of CommaCon 2021. Before we end, I would like to invite Amira again to take a group photo of our enlightened faces after the whole convention, as opposed to when we started. Amira, ready?
Okay, can everyone switch on your cameras, please? Yeah, so just a quick one, and then we'll take a photo, and then we can all be on our merry way. Okay, I'll just wait for everybody to switch on your cameras. Ajmal, Halil, Nuliana, Alia, Huda, Aisha, Anik, Nurfika, Aisha, Kadira, Ayin, Talisa, and Faris. Now, if you are camera shy, you can just give me a reaction, okay? Just give me a reaction so that I can take the photo. Okay, everybody just smile. Ready? One. Oops, sorry. My camera is not working. Okay, Kazira, no worries. Understand. Okay, everybody just smile. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Amira, for helping to take the group photo. So before you go, just two things. First, if you would like, you can scan the QR code on the bottom left-hand corner of my screen here with your banking app to donate to AMP Singapore. You can just fill in the UEN code and you can proceed to do any donation. Any amount is appreciated. Secondly, please take a minute to fill in our feedback form so we can create better programs for you in the future, hopefully. You can scan the QR code here as well, or you can just go to bit.ly/ccmodvoy feedback. Do follow us on our Facebook and Instagram profiles at Young AMPs SG and Improv SG to keep posted on our future events. Thank you once again for spending your Saturday morning with us. Stay healthy and stay safe. Have a great weekend, everyone.